The storm was rising above the alien desert, and the human traveler named Daniel walked slowly through the sharp winds, carrying only a broken pack and a faint hope of finding shelter before the night turned deadly and the sand swallowed him whole. And when his ears caught a strange muffled cry, he froze in place, his heart beating fast, because the sound was not from the wind. It was softer, more desperate, like someone was trapped inside the ground. He moved closer and brushed the layers of sand aside with his hands until he uncovered a stone opening that looked sealed by natural growth, like layers of crystal fused together over time. And from behind that strange sealed surface, he heard the faint cry again, trembling, weak and full of pain. And Daniel pressed his ear against it, realizing that someone was alive inside, and running out of breath he pulled at the stone surface. But it did not break. It was tight closed and smoother than glass, and the voice inside grew weaker with every passing moment, and Daniel felt the weight of choice pressing on his chest, because he was just a lone wanderer, and no one would blame him for walking away, but something in his human spirit refused to leave a living being trapped behind. He searched the sand for tools, and found only a broken metal shard half buried in the dust, and with that shard he struck again, and again, sparks flying, and sweat pouring down his neck, the storm closing around him while his hands bled from the sharp edges. And still he did not stop, because every cry from behind the sealed surface was fading thinner than the last thread of air. Finally a crack appeared, thin, glowing with strange blue light, and Daniel pushed his fingers into it, tearing it wider, ignoring the pain until the surface shattered with a sound like breaking glass. And suddenly he fell forward into a small chamber, lit with pale alien glow, and in the center lay a girl, unlike any human, her skin silver pale, her hair like woven crystal strands, and her chest rising weakly as if she had not breathed real air in many days. Her eyes opened halfway, and she whispered something in a tongue Daniel did not understand, yet her fear and hope were clear in her trembling gaze. And Daniel felt his breath catch, because she was not only alive but fragile, like the world itself had locked her away and given him alone the chance to decide her fate. And he knew he could not fail her, not now, not after breaking through what no one else could. The storm howled louder above, and sand poured into the chamber through the broken entrance. But Daniel lifted the alien girl into his arms, her body weightless as if she was made of air and light. And he promised in his heart that no matter what word or law tried to bind her closed again, he would fight it, because he had come this far, not by accident, but by something deeper that told him this meeting would change not only his journey, but the fate of more than one world. Daniel carried the alien girl out of the sealed chamber and into the rising storm, his body shaking under the pressure of the heavy winds that struck him from every side, and the grains of sand cut across his skin like tiny knives. Yet he held her tighter, knowing that if he lost his grip, she would be gone forever in the endless dunes that swallowed everything without mercy. And the strange glow from her hair shimmered faintly, even in the storm, as if guiding him through the chaos. He searched for any sign of shelter, and his eyes caught a jagged rock formation that stood like the ribs of a giant beast, broken and buried in the sand. And with all his strength, he pushed forward until he reached the shadows of the rocks and slid into a narrow gap that offered enough cover from the violent winds. The storm outside roared like a beast, but inside the crack of stone, he felt a moment of silence, broken only by the shallow breaths of the girl in his arms. Her skin was cold like ice, and her lips moved, but no sound came out. So Daniel placed her gently on the ground and pulled the torn fabric of his cloak around her small frame, hoping to give warmth where there was none. And he watched her face glow faintly with the alien light, as if her body held energy different from any human, and he realized she was fighting for life, but also holding a secret that could not be spoken yet. Daniel felt the weight of exhaustion pressing into his bones, but the urgency of her condition forced him to move. He searched his pack and found a half-empty flask of water and brought it to her lips, and though her eyes fluttered weakly, she drank in small gulps like someone tasting real life for the first time in years. And for a moment her gaze locked on his, and he saw gratitude mixed with fear, as if she was torn between trusting him and fearing what rescue might bring. Storm outside began to settle, but in the distance, Daniel heard a sound not made by nature. It was metallic, sharp, and rhythmic, like the march of machines across the sand, and he knew immediately that he was not alone out here. Others had been searching for this sealed chamber and the girl inside it, and if they found him now, both his life and hers would be in danger. So he pressed his back against the stone and held his breath, listening to the machines draw closer. The alien girl stirred and whispered one word. Her voice cracked, but the meaning clear enough. She said, "Hunter," and Daniel felt the chill run down his spine, because if hunters were coming, then she was not just a lost wanderer. She was someone important enough to be locked away and tracked by forces far beyond what he understood. Yet now she was with him, and the hunters would see him as the thief who had broken what they had sealed. He lifted her again, ignoring the ache in his muscles, and scanned the rocks for another passage, and found a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground, carved long ago by water or time, and without hesitation he entered the darkness, carrying her through the twisting path. As the sound of machines grew louder above the ground, the deeper he went, the colder the air became, and the glowing strands of her hair lit the way like faint lanterns, showing that even in her weakness she guided him forward. At last they emerged into a cavern, vast and echoing, with ancient walls carved by unknown hands, with symbols glowing faintly across the stone like messages left by a civilization long forgotten. And Daniel felt awe and fear mix in his chest, because he realized he had not only freed her, but also stepped into a place that was never meant to be found. In the fate of both human and alien now rested on what secret waited in the silence of that cavern, where time itself seemed to hold its breath. The cavern stretched wider with every step Daniel took, his boots scraping against ancient stone that hummed faintly, as if alive, and the glow from the alien girl's hair painted strange reflections across the walls where symbols pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and waiting. And Daniel felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him, though no creature revealed itself in the shadows. The air itself carried a presence heavy and powerful, whispering that this place was sacred and forgotten, and not meant for human trespass. He laid the girl gently near a stone pillar carved with spirals of light, and her body seemed to resonate with it. Her breathing steadied, though her skin still carried the cold touch of someone who had been trapped for too long, and she looked at him with eyes that no longer held only fear, but also recognition, as if she had known him before across dreams or destinies not yet written. And Daniel struggled to understand, yet deep in his chest he felt it too, that invisible thread pulling them together. The ground trembled softly, and from the far side of the cavern a hidden door opened, with a low grinding sound releasing a flow of air that smelled of iron and fire. And Daniel gripped the shard of metal he still carried, though it was dull and weak, because instinct warned him that danger was coming faster than his mind could reason. And within the archway appeared shapes tall and armored, with blades of energy humming in their hands. The hunters had found them sooner than he feared. The alien girl whispered again, her voice stronger than before, saying that these hunters were bound by oath to keep her sealed for eternity, because her body was vessel of knowledge older than empires, knowledge that if released could shift power between worlds. And Daniel felt his throat tighten at the weight of her words, because he had freed not only a girl, but a secret that many would kill to bury again. Yet his human spirit refused to regret it, for he could not abandon life when it cried out for help. The hunters advanced, their eyes cold and glowing within helmets that hid all trace of mercy, and Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between them and the girl, though his hands shook and his weapon was nothing more than a shard. Yet the hunters hesitated for a brief moment, as if confused by the sight of a human defending what they considered forbidden. And in that pause the girl lifted her hand, and the symbols across the cavern walls flared with sudden brilliance, bathing the space in blinding light. The hunters staggered, blinded for seconds, and Daniel seized the moment, dragging the girl through another opening revealed by the glowing patterns, and together they stumbled into a narrow corridor that sloped upward toward some unknown exit. The ground rumbled again, as if the cavern itself responded to her presence. And Daniel realized she was connected to this place, like a key to a lock, and now that he had freed her, the ancient structures were waking from their endless sleep. They reached a high chamber where a pool of luminous water spread across the floor, shimmering with colors unknown to human eyes, and the girl touched its surface and whispered words in her alien tongue, and the pool responded, rising in spirals of liquid light, forming images in the air of stars colliding, empires falling, and a path of exile that ended with her sealed away until someone strong enough and stubborn enough to break through found her. And Daniel knew that someone had been him. Her voice broke as she explained that once the hunters claimed her again, they would silence the secret forever, destroying both her and the knowledge within. And Daniel felt the choice burning within him like fire, though he was only one man lost in alien deserts. His heart told him he had no right to surrender her now. He had to stand against them, even if it meant facing blades and machines beyond his strength. Because sometimes the only power a human had was the refusal to give up above them. The storm thundered again as the hunters forced their way closer, their steps echoing through the corridors, and Daniel clenched his shard tighter, his chest rising with steady breaths while the girl's light grew stronger, illuminating every shadow around them. And together, they prepared for the clash that could decide not only their survival but also the fate of secrets hidden since the dawn of stars. And in that moment, Daniel no longer felt like a wanderer. He felt like a defender chosen by chance yet bound by destiny. The chamber shook as the hunters forced open the lower passage, their metallic steps echoing like thunder, climbing closer with every moment. And Daniel stood tall, though his legs trembled, because he knew the shard in his hand was no true weapon against their energy blades. Yet he also knew that surrender was impossible since the girl's life depended on him, and his human heart refused to let fear chain him to inaction. The girl's glow brightened, and the symbols along the walls pulsed faster, as if they too sensed the coming clash. Daniel guided her behind him and whispered promises, though she might not understand the words, his voice steady and determined that he would protect her until his last breath, and her eyes shimmered with silent strength, as if she believed not in his shard, but in his spirit. And in that exchange, Daniel found a courage that burned hotter than the fear pressing in on him. The corridor filled with the sharp whirring hum of hunter blades, and their shadows stretched long across the stone walls like claws reaching for prey. The first hunter appeared tall, armored with silver plates, reflecting the alien light, and in his hands a blade of red energy that cut the air with a hiss. Daniel raised his shard and lunged forward, reckless yet desperate, striking against the armor with all his weight. Sparks flew, but the hunter did not fall. Instead, his blade swung down, and Daniel rolled aside, the heat searing close enough to scorch his cloak, and the fight thundered in the narrow chamber, where every movement echoed like the roar of storms above. Girl lifted her hand, and the symbols across the floor lit up again, releasing a wave of blinding light that forced the hunter to step back, his armor shaking under the sudden energy. And Daniel seized the chance, ramming his shard into the gap of the armor at the waist. And though it was no killing blow, the hunter stumbled, falling against the wall. The clash had only begun, yet Daniel realized that together they had power. Her light and his determination could disrupt even enemies far beyond their strength. More hunters poured into the chamber, each step heavier than the last, their voices mechanical, their words sharp, an alien tongue calling her the vessel, calling him thief, calling both condemned. And Daniel felt the weight of the odds crushing him, yet when he looked at her he saw not weakness, but a light that grew stronger with every danger. And he knew that she was awakening from the prison that had kept her sealed not only in crystal but in silence and fear. The pool of luminous water in the center of the chamber surged upward, forming a barrier of liquid light that slowed the advance of the hunters, and the girl's voice rose in melody, ancient and fierce. The symbols across the chamber glowed brighter, linking her song with the living stone itself. And Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his feet, as if the cavern was alive, answering her command. The hunters slashed against the barrier, but the water reformed again and again, stronger with every note she sang. Daniel realized then that this girl was not simply someone he had rescued. She was a Force bound to this place, a living key that could awaken powers buried since before his species. Learned fire, and now he was not only her protector, but also the one chosen to carry her beyond this prison into the wider stars. Her gaze locked with his, and in that silence he understood that their bond was no accident, but a turning point woven by fate. The hunters regrouped, pressing harder, their blades burning through the barrier inch by inch, and Daniel clenched his shard once more, ready to throw himself into the path of their advance, when suddenly the chamber ceiling cracked and a tunnel of light opened above, rushing air sweeping through and pulling at them like the breath of a great beast. The girl reached for him, her hand glowing like fire, and he grabbed it tightly, knowing that if they leapt together, they might escape. Though the unknown above might hold dangers greater than the hunters below, and so without hesitation, Daniel lifted her into his arms and jumped into the column of light as the cavern shattered behind them and the hunters. Shouts echoed into the void. They left behind the rush of air, carried them upward into a realm beyond stone and sand, where their true journey was only beginning. The column of light carried Daniel and the alien girl upward through endless layers of stone and sand until they burst out into a night sky filled with stars brighter than he had ever seen, and the desert stretched vast beneath them with storms swirling like angry seas. Yet the light lifted them higher until they landed gently upon a plateau of smooth black stone that shone with reflections of the heavens, and Daniel fell to his knees, gripping the girl close, his lungs burning from the rush of air, while his mind struggled to understand what force had pulled them here. The girl's glow steadied, and her breathing calmed, though her body still trembled from weakness, and she whispered words that touched the stone beneath them, causing symbols to appear across the plateau, glowing in circles around them like a map written by the stars themselves. And Daniel watched in awe as those lines rose from the ground, forming shapes of towers and gates and bridges stretching into infinity, like the ruins of a forgotten city rising again from the dust of ages. She turned to him with eyes full of urgency, and spoke in broken fragments of his language, telling him that this place was the crossing, a gate between worlds once used by her kind, but sealed when hunters swore an oath to keep her power hidden forever. And Daniel felt the weight of her confession like chains upon his chest, because he realized that his choice to break the seal had not only freed her but awakened the gate itself, drawing enemies from across the stars who would stop at nothing to close it again. A low rumble spread across the plateau as figures emerged at the far edge, their silhouettes sharp against the starlight, not hunters this time, but beings taller and robed, their faces hidden, yet their voices deep and resonant as they spoke in unison, calling her the Keeper, calling him the Breaker, and demanding that she return to the prison before the balance shattered. And Daniel stood once more between her and them, though every part of him longed for rest. His human spirit refused to bend. The robed figures raised staffs, glowing with streams of energy that crackled like lightning in their hands, and Daniel braced himself, but before they could strike, the girl placed her palm upon his chest, her light flooding through him, filling his veins with strength he had never known. And for a moment he felt taller, stronger, faster, as if his body carried the fire of 1,000 suns, and he realized she had shared part of her essence with him, trusting him with power that could stand against the robed guardians. The battle began with a storm of light, their staffs sending bolts crashing across the plateau, shaking the black stone, while Daniel moved with speed impossible, a single leap carrying him through the blasts, his shard of metal glowing now with the same light she had given him, striking against their defenses with force that shattered the ground, and each impact echoed like thunder rolling across the night sky. The girl stood within the glowing circle, her voice rising in song, weaving the symbols tighter and brighter to keep the gate alive. The robed figures faltered as his strikes grew stronger, powered by human determination, bound with alien essence. And though they outnumbered him, they could not match his refusal to yield. Each time he fell, he rose again. Each time they struck, he struck harder, and the girl's song filled the air with hope and defiance, binding them together as one force standing against a storm of ages, her light glowing brighter than the stars themselves. At last the plateau quaked, and the robed figures retreated, fading into the darkness, their voices promising they would return with Greater fury, yet for now the gate remained open, the symbols shining with living fire, and Daniel dropped to his knees, his strength drained, his shard cracked and broken, yet his heart alive with victory. The girl knelt beside him, her hand upon his face, her eyes shimmering with tears that were not of sorrow but of gratitude and trust. And she whispered that their fight had only begun. Above them, the stars shifted, forming a path of light leading beyond the desert, beyond the hunters and guardians, beyond the prison of one world into the vast unknown. And Daniel felt the pull of destiny, stronger than fear, stronger than exhaustion, knowing that his choice had bound him forever to this girl and to a journey that would decide the fate of worlds waiting unseen in the endless dark. The night stretched endless above the plateau as the stars realigned into pathways of light that shimmered like rivers across the sky, and Daniel stood with the alien girl beside him, their bodies still trembling from the battle, yet their hearts bound together by something deeper than survival. And when she raised her hand toward the glowing constellations, the symbols beneath their feet shifted once more, revealing an arch of radiant stone rising slowly from the plateau, its shape curved like wings and its surface carved with marks that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Daniel felt the pull of the arch calling him forward, though he knew nothing of what lay beyond it, and the girl whispered that this was the first door to the corridor of worlds, a road hidden from hunters and guardians alike, but one that demanded courage and sacrifice from those who walked it. Her voice trembled with both warning and hope, and Daniel listened carefully, though fear coiled inside him, because he understood that once they stepped through, there would be no return to the sand and storms of the desert below. Before they could move, the plateau shook again as shadows spread across its edges, hunters climbing from the sands and guardians descending from the skies, their enemies uniting for the first time, their voices echoing through the night as they declared that the gate must never be crossed. And Daniel realized the truth, that his act of breaking the seal had forced ancient rivals to join hands against him and against the girl, and though the thought should have crushed him, it only sharpened his resolve, because if they were so desperate to stop her, then her journey must hold the key to something greater than either side wished. To admit the girl touched his hand, and warmth flooded his chest, her glow steady, now no longer fragile, but strong, as if the bond between them had awakened her true strength, and together they stepped toward the arch, the light growing brighter until it blinded the eyes of their pursuers. Yet the hunters rushed forward, blades raised, while the guardians hurled bolts of lightning, their fury shaking the plateau apart, cracks opening like wounds across the black stone. Daniel knew that if they hesitated for even one breath, they would be swallowed by the storm of enemies, so he lifted her into his arms and charged through the rising blasts, his body fueled by the essence she had shared with him, his steps heavy but unbroken, his grip unshaken, though the air itself screamed with fire and steel. And in that final moment before reaching the arch, the girl pressed her lips near his ear, whispering that once they crossed, he would see the truth of why fate had brought them together. They leapt into the arch, and the world shattered around them, light consuming everything in a torrent of colors beyond imagination. Daniel felt himself pulled through endless corridors of sound and vision, stars collapsing and forming in the blink of an eye, and through it all he clung to her, knowing that letting go would mean being lost forever in the chaos of the crossing. Their hearts beat as one against the roar of creation, until at last the torrent calmed, and silence fell like snow when Daniel opened his eyes. He stood on ground of silver grass, beneath a sky with three suns rising in harmony, their light bathing valleys filled with towers that floated above rivers of glowing mist, and the girl beside him breathed deeply, her chest rising strong. For the first time since he had freed her, she whispered that this was her world, once proud and vast before hunters betrayed her people and guardians sealed her away, and Daniel felt the truth of her pain pressing against his own heart. Yet he also felt wonder, because he knew he had stepped into a realm no human had ever seen. But their moment of peace was short, for across the valley horns sounded deep and mournful, and shadows moved among the towers. The girl gripped his hand tighter, telling him that though this was her home, it was no longer safe, that the betrayal still lingered, that the enemies who sought to silence her had not given up, and Daniel looked across the glowing horizon, knowing that his choice to break the seal had not only freed her, but placed him at the center of a war that spanned worlds and destinies far greater than his own. The valley of silver grass glowed under the light of 3 suns as Daniel and the alien girl stood hand in hand, their bodies weary, yet their spirits unbroken, and the air itself carried a strange song like whispers of ages long past, echoing through the floating towers that cast shadows across rivers of mist. And though beauty surrounded them, the sound of horns grew louder, and the march of enemies drew closer, their shapes forming on the horizon, armored legions that moved with one purpose: to silence the girl forever, and to erase the human who had dared to break her seal. Daniel tightened his grip on the shard of metal, though cracked and nearly useless, for he knew that no weapon forged by his hand could match the blades of those who came. Yet he also knew that his will, his stubborn refusal to yield, was sharper than steel and stronger than fire. And when the girl looked into his eyes with a light that burned brighter than the sun's, he felt that same power flow again through his veins, reminding him that she had trusted him with her essence, and that together they were more than prey running from predators. Armies advanced, their voices chanting in alien tongues, calling her the vessel of forbidden knowledge, calling him the breaker who must be undone. And as the ground trembled with their march, the girl stepped forward, her glow spreading across the valley, her voice rising in a melody that resonated with the towers and the rivers, and even the very sky. And Daniel watched in awe as the world itself answered her song, the towers lighting up with streams of fire, the rivers surging upward into shapes of light, forming guardians, not of flesh but of memory, bound to defend her return. The enemies clashed against the rising guardians, their blades cutting through light and fire, yet for every figure that fell another rose from the mist, and Daniel leapt into the fray, his body moving with speed gifted by her bond, his strikes wild yet filled with a force that turned weakness into strength. And though wounds opened across his arms and his legs burned with exhaustion, he refused to fall. He refused to surrender, for he had chosen her not out of duty, but out of humanity that never let him walk away from life in need. The battle shook the valley until the suns themselves seemed to tremble, and the girl sang louder, her voice breaking the chains of silence placed upon her long ago, her light now a storm that blinded friend and foe alike. And in that brilliance, the truth revealed itself in visions that filled Daniel's mind. He saw her people betrayed by the hunters. He saw the guardians sealing her to preserve balance, twisted by lies. He saw worlds waiting for the key. She carried a key, not to destruction, but to renewal. And he realized then why fate had brought a human to her prison, because only someone outside their endless war could break it. Daniel stood bleeding but unyielding as the last wave of enemies pressed forward, and the girl joined him, taking his hand, her glow merging fully with his body until they were one light blazing across the battlefield. And together they struck a single blow, not with metal, but with defiance, their hearts united in a force that tore through the legions and shattered the chains of silence forever. The valley roared with light, brighter than suns, and when the brilliance faded, silence fell not of death, but of awe. The enemies scattered, broken and leaderless, their voices no longer chanting, but whispering in fear of what had awakened. And the girl stood tall, her strength restored, her voice steady as she declared that no chain would bind her again, that no oath would bury the truth of her people again. And Daniel at her side felt the truth as well, that his journey had only begun, for though one battle was won, the path of stars ahead still called them forward as the sun set in harmony, painting the sky with rivers of gold and crimson. The girl looked at him with eyes filled not only with gratitude, but with something deeper and softer. And Daniel, though weary and scarred, knew that he had not just freed her, he had freed himself from the chains of wandering without purpose. He had found meaning in her light and in that bond. And as they walked together across the silver valley toward the horizon, both human and alien, both survivor and keeper, their story became not of prison and seal, but of hope and defiance written across the stars.